What makes a game stick with you? Not just mechanically, but viscerally, emotionally. Why does something like the original Dead Space feel unforgettable, even if its systems are slow? Why does Darkest Dungeon leave such a strong impression, even when it's brutally unfair? Hi, I'm Ace. Today, we're talking about Flavor-First Design, a philosophy in game development that puts feeling, atmosphere, and fantasy at the very front of the design process. And I want to make the case that Flavor-First Design doesn't just produce great games, it creates experiences that linger, reshape genres, and inspire other forms of creativity. Flavor-First Design is a philosophy where the feel of the game, the world, the tone, the fantasy, the aesthetic, is the primary driving force behind its mechanics. It starts by asking, what kind of world are we in? What do I want the players to feel? What story or fantasy do I want to deliver? Only after that do designers start thinking, what mechanics support this? How do we express this feeling through gameplay? In contrast, mechanics-first design often starts with a system, say a deck builder or a movement mechanic, and builds a world around it. Neither is wrong, but they serve different purposes. For example, Darkest Dungeon is built around the psychological horror of dungeon crawling. Mechanics like stress, afflictions, and permadeath come directly from that emotional tone. Hollow Knight leads with its mysterious, melancholic world. The gameplay is excellent, but it's designed to serve a mood, not the other way around. Magic the Gathering's Color Pie is another perfect example of flavor-first design on a systemic level. Each color represents a worldview, like white's order and community, or black's ambition and selfishness, and the mechanics flow from those philosophies. Flavor isn't an afterthought. It defines the entire logic of the game's design. Flavor-first design doesn't mean rules light or sloppy. It means intentional. Every rule, every UI element, every sound effect meaningfully contributes to the fantasy. So what are the benefits of designing this way? Well, for starters, this leads to better emotional cohesion. Games that feel like they click emotionally usually have a strong flavor-first spine. The world, the rules, the tone, everything points in the same direction. But I think most importantly, player immersion. When a game leans into a strong tone of fantasy, it becomes easier for players to lose themselves in it. They might forgive mechanical quirks if the flavor is immersive and if the fantasy they are experiencing is particularly evocative. This leads right into the next benefit, creating memorable experiences. You might forget a clever combo system or want to skip exploring a copy and pasted building in Biomutant. You don't forget the moment your torchlight went out in Darkest Dungeon and your party cracked under the pressure. Flavor-first design encourages meaningful moment-to-moment storytelling. And beyond that, this design philosophy also encourages more accessible onboarding. In some cases, flavor-first games are easier to explain, saying, this is American football, but with medieval fantasy violence. Describes Blood Bowl perfectly. It sets the tone and expectations. You gotta score touchdowns and beat up your opponent. Lastly, it allows for greater creative freedom. Flavor-first thinking allows for weirder, more personal games. Systems follow the vibe, not the other way around. This leads developers down unique, flavor-rich paths that reinforce the aesthetic and feel of their games. Now, it's not all perfect. Flavor-first design can fall apart without proper execution. For example, if mechanics don't support the fantasy. This is by far the easiest mistake to make. When the gameplay doesn't match the tone, it feels disjointed. Think of a horror game where enemies pose no real threat. It kills the fear. Like Callisto Protocol, once you figure out its very predictable combat system. The fights with the horror-coded monsters then become more of a chore than an emotional fight for survival. Also, whenever style takes over substance, flavor loses its appeal. Some games lean too hard on aesthetics without enough gameplay depth. These become forgettable once the initial novelty wears off. Here I think of games like Scorn, which feels more like a biopunk interactive gallery experience than an adventure game. Flavor also falls short when games lack clear communication. Games still need onboarding, UX, and clarity. If flavor comes at the cost of usability, players get frustrated. Games like Escape from Tarkov, Star Citizen, or League of Legends have a particularly hard learning curve and complex onboarding experience. Although it's debatable if this complexity contributes to those games' own flavor, it is no surprise that less accessible onboarding deters potential players that get immediately overwhelmed. The solution? Alignment. Flavor-first design works when the system, the UI, the sound, the writing, and the mechanics all reinforce a fantasy in tangible ways. And the key factor to ensure alignment is to understand the expectations of your audience. A person buying a horror game expects a complete and accessible horror experience. The design philosophy isn't just for game, however. In writing, think of genre fiction that leads with a strong world concept, like Dune or Harry Potter. The world building drives everything. In product design, brands that build a strong narrative, like Patagonia or Red Bull, have flavor-first identities. Their marketing, visuals, and even their product design reflects a cohesive story and feeling. In music and art direction, flavor-first projects often make bold, consistent aesthetic choices. Think of Ozzy Osbourne or the graphic novels of Tilly Walden. They're rooted in a strong sense of mood and identity. Flavor-first is really just another way to say, lead with voice, lead with vision. But in my personal headcanon, I like to refer to the concept of flavor-first design as mood-based or vibe-based design. Just like the saying goes, an image is worth 1,000 words, but a well-executed vibe is worth so much more. By leveraging the expectations of your audience, their past experiences, and appropriate cultural references for that demographic, you can seamlessly evoke rich and flavorful concepts and experiences with little effort. Imagine a game called Pirate Sushi Store. You see it instantly, right? The core gameplay evokes a familiar restaurant managing loop, prepping food, serving customers, running a kitchen. But the pirate twist instantly floods your imagination with new, flavor-rich ideas. Sailing to exotic islands for rare fish, raiding rival seafood ships, serving wealthy aristocrats in a converted pirate ship turned sushi bar with gold-plated decor made from stolen treasure. Maybe you even got a minigame where you pickpocket the customers while serving them eel rolls. It doesn't need a lore dump or a tutorial to make sense because the tone, the mood, the flavor of Pirate Sushi Store does the heavy lifting. You've combined two evocative themes that are deeply familiar, and in doing so, you create a world that invites mechanics to emerge naturally. And all that's left is to reinforce it visually. Nautical textures, cheeky pirate voice lines, treasure-themed UI. The fantasy teaches the player how to play. Flavor-first design isn't about ignoring mechanics. It's about making everything in a game serve the feeling you want to create. It's about asking, what would this world really feel like? How would it work? And how can players live in it? When done right, Flavor-First Design produces not just a game, but a memory. A moment of immersion that creates a lived experience. And that's something players carry with them long after the credits roll. Thank you for watching this to the end. This is a video idea that has been with me for years, and it's a philosophy that I bring with me everywhere I can, especially in my graphic design work. When I get a brief from a client for a marketing design project, I try to find the right approach that matches the flavor that I wish to evoke in my target audience's mind, even if subconsciously. I aim to find the right seasoning and pairings to create the perfect mix of visual references and stimuli as to communicate more than what simple words could. And I think this philosophy applies to much more than just creative work. Any form of communication, visual or otherwise, can be flavored to match the desired palette and create a long-lasting impression in people's minds. Think of that high school teacher that gave a speech in Gen Alpha slang. He flavored his delivery to match his audience and created a viral moment that will probably stick with these kids in the stands much longer than any other presentation. But that is perhaps the subject for a video for another time. Until then, I hope you're keeping well, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!